It's no mystery that we go through life achieving actually a huge amount of things. We achieve that, and that. But each step of the way, we kind of hope that the next iteration of whatever we're trying to achieve is finally going to allow us to land in a place where we're content. Everything's fine. We're at some level of peace. But that seems to be more of an apparition than a reality these days, as we stumble from thing to thing to thing. And so we kind of get the feeling that we never really arrive. Now, I'm going to propose a solution to all of this, one that I have gathered from my own life. Perhaps this isn't the only solution. There are many reasons as to why we don't feel like we have landed or arrived in life. But this is really a huge one, and one I think that is kind of a centerpiece for modern living and how we don't allow ourselves to feel as though we've arrived. Now, a lot of this is going to be about changing the way we think, especially surrounding our belief systems. But in order to change our belief systems, we need to have proper evidence that prompts us to start making those kinds of belief system changes. So let me try and present some evidence which may allow that process to start happening for you. Let's start with things outside of ourselves, and we're going to be talking about the ones which you've probably heard a million times, money, fame, numbers, influence, materialism, all that stuff. The common denominator between all of these things I just mentioned is that they kind of rely on a system which perpetuates them. As long as we keep over-promising ourselves about what these very things could deliver if we achieve them in grandiosity, we're going to keep seeking them. For example, with money, we may have experienced what it's like to receive a certain amount of money and felt a very joyous effect from that, particularly because we are experiencing a transition from, for example, $1,000 to $10,000, which is a really good point to note, because Morgan Housel, who wrote The Psychology of Money, quoted that people are always chasing the gap between what they used to have and what they have today, which means the joy came more from the jump between here to here rather than the money itself. And as we keep making those jumps, especially exponentially, we start to feel less joy from those jumps. I've heard it said that the millionaire going to a billionaire feels like less of an achievement compared to somebody going from perhaps 1,000 to 10,000. But the main point is that we at some point created a misinformed belief about how money brings us joy, and it's to be pursued, and it's to be treated as a god, and it's going to give us that sense of potentially arriving in the future if we had just made X amount of money. But that's not going to give you what you want, especially if we're talking about these deeper levels of contentment and peace within oneself. In fact, anything pertaining to numbers is a really dangerous game to be playing, because no matter which number you're at, quantifying whatever level of anything, there's always going to be more. And so once you've experienced the kind of intermittent joy of making some kind of travel from one number to another, you're going to be very quickly like, okay, I feel kind of empty again, something's kind of missing again, I need to feel that joy again. And so you're chasing these highs, which, as I said, diminish over time. Now moving on to fame and influence, it's the same thing. You're still chasing numbers, followers, subscribers, whatever it may be. And no matter what level of fame you're at, you're still going to have all your other problems. And if you want fame so badly in the first place, it's probably because you're chasing it for the wrong reasons, and you put it too highly on a pedestal because you felt perhaps some level of inferiority earlier in your life. And in order to make things right, you have to fix that inferiority by climbing to absurd levels of fame just to reach absurd levels of escapism within yourself. But as we're going to see very soon, the solution is a lot closer to us and doesn't require us to run that direction, and that direction in order to feel as though we're content. And if we're talking about materialism, this also does apply to fame and money, by the way, but is particularly relevant to materialism, is the hedonic treadmill, whereby each time we acquire a new thing, we adapt emotionally to whatever we've bought. and the new kind of baseline of normality returns emotionally after you've experienced the spike of having bought the new thing or whatever it is. But the point being is that you're going to start feeling exactly how you were before you had acquired it. So what you'll notice we're doing is we're kind of going and relinquishing these false idols. You could say we are renunciating these beliefs and these things that we chase by default because they're exploitations of the way that we are wired to attain more and more and more as a means of carrying out unconscious survival measures. You don't even know you're doing it, but they are pretty imperative functions of the way the mind works. And if they're not mediated and understood to be false idols, then things like the mesolimbic pathway, more commonly known as the reward pathway or the dopamine pathway, basically mean that we have systems in place that will carry on in this kind of manner if we don't step in. So we have to recognize which parts of our lives are actually dead ends, because we're not really taught a lot of this stuff. We almost have to chase it for a while, realize that it's not really doing anything for us, and then decide to take it out of the box where we are overpromising on what it could be giving us. Because you only need to have a certain amount of experience with these things at lesser scales before they become out of hand. Because, for example, we've all bought certain things in life and then gotten used to them, and then we feel as though we want to buy something again. The truth is those things don't change even as the spending grows higher and higher and higher. And with fame, let's say that you had the belief that you're finally going to be happy or whatever when you achieve 10,000 followers, and then you get there and then you're looking at 20,000 and you can see how that just doesn't matter how many you have. Now you can still strive for things like that, but have the clarity that they're not going to give you what you're hoping, at least before you've perhaps had the experience, or take my word for it. And so what happens when there's really nothing left to chase? When we've taken all these things in our life that we used to put so much emphasis on, and we're not really chasing them anymore, at least not with the same mental framework, what happens then? Well, paradoxically, that's when you begin to actually arrive. That's when you begin to feel as though you aren't missing anything, so to speak. Because all this reinforcing that we take part in with the energy of overpromise leaves us feeling as though there is a gap to close, and this moment right now doesn't feel enough, and I have to be somewhere else. So you can still desire, but it is with less attachment, and I believe it's much healthier in that way. So in all this kind of relinquishing that we're doing, veering off the path of the well-trodden neurological pathways which have been built to carry on this false sense of traveling towards a greater future, reminds me of the quote from Alan Watts. A scholar tries to learn something every day, but a student of Buddhism tries to unlearn something daily. So here's the thing, you can decide to arrive now in this moment at any time, but it requires a certain relinquishing of our previous beliefs. Now what we've talked about so far is external stuff, but what about the internal stuff? A lot of the time I think we view our internal problems as possible pathways to this overpromise of peace and contentment. And surely if we just fix this problem within us, we're finally going to be free and everything's going to be great again. But a similar problem remains, and I'll tell you why. To be human is to have problems, and with the mindset of thinking we're finally going to be free if this happens, it kind of negates that fact. It's been said that when one problem is solved, another one just comes in with almost equal intensity anyway. So why do we look at particular problems and then use those problems as a means to offset peace? It's because of that overpromise we make to ourselves. So by addressing the belief that fixing certain problems within us is going to bring us contentment and peace, when although it can be true, I think a lot of the time it can still be harmful to have that mindset. What could really help us instead is just accepting the fact that to be human is to have human problems. And instead of kind of feeding this reality where perhaps we're going to have everything solved and everything's going to be great, we can come back down to earth from the sky and just allow the human experience to play out. I'll tell you now, that's easier said than done because it's a relinquishing of control, and that could also bring about, I think, quite a bit of fear in people, because acceptance of this moment is arrival. It's only when we look at this moment and say no that it all becomes about trying to close the gap between now and some imagined point where arrival must be. It would help us to adopt the Taoist principle of Wu Wei, which is all about letting the river take you. Because that right there is one of the most worthwhile things you can do as a human being, is to learn to adopt that mentality, because there's so much we're not in control of, and so much of it is automatic. And as much as we like to try and control what's happening in us, the constant striving to have these things fixed brings about a serious chasm between where we want to be and where we are. So to recap, there are a number of things which are keeping us from feeling as though we've arrived in life. We can be the ones to decide if we want to arrive now, but it requires us to relinquish certain things in our belief system, which have served as false idols to chase for all these years. And so we start seeking evidence to the contrary of these beliefs and being intentional about rewiring these beliefs to no longer promise what they used to promise. And tapping into our power of accepting the human experience for what it is, and the fact that we can't control a huge amount of it, as much as we would like to, allows us to settle in more with what's happening now and promotes more of a sense of being in the flow of things rather than needing to be somewhere else. So there was a bit to digest here in this video, and I still feel as though I'm just scraping the surface on this topic and a lot of the things that were mentioned in this video. If you would like me to make a video on a certain thing mentioned here, or anything within the realm of what I talk about usually for that matter, feel free to leave a comment, and I hope this was useful.